This event happened when I was around 16 years old. I'm 24 now, and it was on a night when nobody was home but me. My brother was in a military course at that time, and my parents were going away for vacation. I was still in school and never really got a chance to be up late at night playing video games, so I distinctly remember both the joy and terror of being completely alone, or, in this case, not alone. It was around 3 in the morning or so. I know, the cliche devil hour, and I was playing World of Warcraft with the headphones on. At first, nothing really caught my attention and I was focused on the game. But then I heard a light tapping sound on my dorm room. It was light but loud enough for me to notice, despite the sounds of the game and the music. And it got to the point where I had to take off the headphones and begin to listen closely. The light in my room was off, same as all the lights in the house. My mum was really strict about using electricity and would scold me and my brother every time she saw us wasting energy, so I was 100% sure that all the lights were off that night. But when I directed my head towards the sound, I noticed something was really off. The light outside of my room was on. Not only that, but it seemed like somebody was standing in front of the door, because there were silhouettes of a pair of feet showing through the thin empty space under the door. I began to sweat and had a panic attack immediately, because I knew that there was no way that it could have been a family member standing outside, and I'll tell you why. The front door of my house always makes a big-ass metallic sound whenever somebody opens or closes it, so if there was someone coming home, I would have known it. Not to mention that all the doors and the windows were completely locked before this. So, this pair of feet couldn't belong to any family members, and that scared the shit out of me. At first, I tried to think logically, and thought that it might actually be a burglar that somehow sneaked into the house. Either way, it was still terrifying being in front of that door, and not knowing who or what was on the other side. But it was time that I confront whatever this is, and I reached for the doorknob. I had stood there for a good long minute or so, and as soon as I touched the doorknob, the light outside just went off, and it was completely quiet. And then something happened, and it made my skin crawl. I heard a faint whistle on the other side of the door. It wasn't a familiar tune or anything either, and it was really eerie and unpleasant to listen to, like flat notes and whatnot. I pulled my hand back from the doorknob and was completely petrified at this point. Something tells me that if I open the door that instant, I might die of a heart attack or something. You can't even imagine the overwhelming fear that I had at that moment. Well, about a few minutes passed. I regained my normal state of mind and finally opened the door, and nothing was there. I searched the entire house, and there was no sign of anybody entering or breaking in. I'm still shocked to this day that I had the courage to go outside my room and check the house, especially after the horror I experienced. I didn't sleep at all that night, and continued to just play WoW, hoping that I would calm myself by playing the game. At the time the sun came up, I headed to bed and was finally able to get some sleep. I skipped school that day and just said that I was sick. I don't think I had enough strength and mental stability to continue the day after that night. But what's crazy about all of this is that I had never encountered anything paranormal in my life, and this freaky incident happened just that one night. My house has no history of hauntings or past owners being dead or anything, and nothing paranormal has happened again so far in this house. And boy, do I hope it stays that way. So here's a story from when I was 19. The funny thing is, it doesn't really stick in my memory as a scary moment until I stay in a caravan. And then, when the lights start going off, it usually comes flooding back. So, for a bit of context, my older brother, as dearly as I love him, is a bit of a dipstick. He's one of those people who goes through life on instinct, but the snag is that his instincts are generally terrible, and it gets him into lots of scrapes. Every so often, one of those scrapes ends up involving me. One thing he kicks ass at, though, is driving. Our dad's a mechanic, and so, since my brother was a preteen, he's been fixing up and racing a certain model of car. Well, the racing didn't start till he was a teen, but still. He's never made much money from it, but as long as he's kept up on cigarettes, weed, and booze, well, he's a happy bunny. Historically, I've never gotten on with his girlfriends, though. This is in part down to the difficulties that I've had befriending other girls throughout the early part of my life, but mostly because my bro has a knack for picking up complete head the balls. So when we were chatting buzzed one night, and he told me that he thought that his new girlfriend, Chantel, was the one, I decided to drag myself back up north to meet the poor unfortunate. I can be pretty judgmental, I admit, and when I met Chantel, I formed a snap judgment that she was no different to his usual fare of crazy. She had the look he goes for, a permatanned, platinum blonde girl with huge jugs crammed into a tracky top. Her nails, you can tell a lot about a girl from her nails, were cherry red witchy things, bolted on with glue and far too long to allow you to do anything practical with them. As I entered our living room and saw her, she was pecking away at the screen of her smartphone like a bird, trying to text. She barely acknowledged me as my brother introduced us, and I think the look I gave him said it all, because before long, he was nervously chattering away about anything and everything that he imagined we had in common. I made all the effort that I could after a 4-hour drive, but she and I could barely hold a 2-sentence conversation together. When my dad called me into the other room, the Storage Hunters was on, and offered me a beer, I all but sprinted out the door. "So, what do you think about Chantel?" he asked me, casting me the sidelong glance he uses when he expects me to go off on one. I belched at him and left it at that, not really knowing where to begin. "You know, your brother is pretty taken with her," he says. At this point, I pull what my family call Sam Iguana's look, where I continue to face the TV but look at my dad to my side. "What do you want, Dad?" "Well, you could go with him to his race this weekend." I pretty much spat my drink out at that, since his next race was in Scotland, and I just finished my last long-ass drive. "Come on, mate, it'd mean so much to him. Nan didn't take her, and you know what he thinks about your ma's opinion." Admittedly, this should have been a red flag. My Nan is like a bullshit-seeking missile, and she's old enough that she doesn't give a fuck. Just picture Alina Tyrell from the Game of Thrones, but Irish, and constantly carrying a pack of 20 Regal in her bra. But I'm sentimental sometimes, and my big bro is such a massive fanny that my opinion probably is quite important to him. My dad senses my hesitation and presses home the advantage, until I'm cramming my luggage back into my car, along with my brother's gear and Chantel's Barbie pink suitcase, which I'm pretty sure is big enough to serve as a viable alternative to the Sawyer's capsule. While I probably shouldn't get further off topic, I'd like to point out that it later emerged that the reason my dad wanted me to go so badly was because he had a lady friend coming around and wanted to get his end away. Fuck you, Dad. Anyway, we take the trip up. My bro leads the way while I follow in my battered old Golf, making painfully awkward small talk with Chantel in the passenger seat as she pecks away at her phone. The first 2 hours are unadulterated hell. But eventually, we start to talk a little more. And when I mentioned that I had recently been dumped by my boyfriend, she actually switches off the screen and consoles me. She makes me feel better by putting on some music, and we bond over a shared love of McFly. By the time that we get to my brother's friend's place in Scotland, we're getting on really well. The place we're staying in is one of those fixed caravan sites. I believe they're called trailer parks in the US. It's a little dingy, especially since holiday season is mostly over now and people are leaving ahead of the site, closing for the winter. But at the same time, the setting is really beautiful. We get set up inside. Bro and Chantel will get the bed. I'll get to hear them nobbing from the converted sofa, and since light is fading and Chantel is complaining about not having 3G, my bro decides to take her to poker night at the local pub. I stick around at the caravan though, because I knew that I'd get separated from the others, and probably cornered for some awkward conversation with a pervy old man if I went. They haven't been gone for much more than an hour when Chantel starts texting me. The penny drops at this point that this is a thing. I don't know if it's FOMO, or just generally being bored with the surroundings, but I figure that at any one time, she's probably texting 4 or 5 people. To be honest, I don't mind. I mean, there's fuck all on TV, and with just my music playing in the darkness, give me a break. I was being emo. My thoughts keep drifting back to my boyfriend, so I'm feeling sorry for myself. Her texting style irritates me a little though. She keeps using a text speak, but sending really long messages, and because the signal's patchy, they keep coming through either incomplete or in the wrong order, leaving me to piece together what she's talking about, like I'm in Memento or something. She also does this weird cross-eyed, tongue-out emoticon at least twice per message. After a while, she talks about how the game's getting good, and stops sending messages. Right as I'm drifting off to sleep, I get a call from an unknown number. I decline it out of hand. I've had the same number since I was 15, and made some very poor choices with which companies I gave it out to. But then, almost immediately, the same number dials me again. At this point, I get pissed off. The boyfriend who ditched me has developed a habit of getting drunk and then calling me, looking for an easy shag. I decline the call again, and ignore the voicemail. A short while later, I'm jerked out of sleep by Chantel. She's texting me again, asking if I'm still awake and if my bro left the keys to his car in the caravan, because he can't find them. I say yes and ask how the poker tournament went, and she says really well. Which caravan is it again? At this point, I am rolling my eyes, presuming that they're retarded. So I just reply back with the model and what it looks like. Over the music from my earphones, though, I hear a noise. It sounded like a man's laugh, but not my brother's. I'm not really sure if that's what I actually heard, but it's isolated as hell out in this campsite, and my heart starts to race, so I stand up and go to the door. I can't see anything at all through this peephole, like it's literally black. There's just no light pollution out here, but as I pull the earphones out, I can hear someone crunching around in the gravel. I damn near shat myself when my phone vibrated in my hand. It was another text from Chantel. It read, "Let me in, kiss." For some reason, this was the point where my standard, alone in the dark scaredy-catness, turned into full-blown fear. I think it was because the footsteps that I could hear were way too heavy and were trying to be way too quiet. My brother's quite light-footed, but a loud drunk, and I just know that I would have heard him and Chantel coming from a mile off. Or my bro would have impersonated a werewolf or something that would have utterly failed to put the shits up me. He's also like a homing pigeon, and there's no way that he would have needed telling which caravan it was. I looked down at Chantel's last few texts and saw the difference in style. It was shorter, capitalized, no annoying derp smiley. I just stood there, frozen, in the darkness. I have no idea how long for either. I figured that they must have been after the car, hence asking about the keys. My mind ran through a detailed CSI-style post-mortem of them finding my body, and I was wondering if it was just theft that I had to worry about, when my stream of thought was interrupted by a series of bangs and a snapping noise like a whip crack. Suddenly, I can see light through the peephole. I'm in full flight or fight mode now, so it takes me a while to lean forward and look through it again. The security light of the caravan opposite is on, but the door beneath it is warped and bent from being forced open. I can see one of them rooting around inside, while the other stands by my brother's car. And then came the words.
Yo, the girl's not here, man.
As usual with me, flight won over fight. Pretty much as soon as I heard that, I went into the bathroom on the far side of the caravan and pushed the window open. I was sure that they'd hear the noise that I made getting out. First my shoes squeaking against the fiberglass. I think that's what caravans are made out of, right? And then the crunch as I landed into the gravel, but I didn't stick around to figure that out. I bolted into the raised woodland just behind the caravan. Not far, but far enough that I had to feel blindly ahead of myself in case I walked into a tree. Once I was completely disorientated, I just waited. I waited for a long time until I heard the first crash of another door being broken, and no more than a minute later, the sound of screeching tires. I never came out until I heard my brother calling for me, and even then, I waited until I could see that they were alone. I damn near throttled him when Chantel told me that he'd been bragging all night about how he was going to use his poker winnings to buy new brakes for the car he raced. Being the doting older brother, he was absolutely livid that I stood by while his car had been pinched, and not taken his keys with me for a jolly little game of cat and mouse with some criminals in the woods. I have no idea how I got mentioned at this poker night, but I'm really glad that my brother's now wife texts like a child on morphine, and that my scumbag ex dumped me so I could mope in the dark. I wish that I could say that this is the first and last time that my brother nearly got me killed, but unfortunately, it isn't. When I was young, from the ages of 2 to 10, I lived on a 7-acre ranch. There was a small house in the front of the property where we lived, a huge grass yard and cabinet shop behind it, and an orchard in the very back full of walnut trees. My father was a carpenter that always worked in the shop, and my mother was a schoolteacher that was almost always busy. Because of their jobs and the fact that they were new to parenting, as I got older, they really didn't pay as much attention as they probably should have to where I would wander off. I would spend my days roaming around the yard, playing in the dirt and running through the walnut trees. I obviously didn't question my lack of supervision, as it was fun to explore this huge plot of land, and I just thought that I was being a normal kid. When I was about 7 years old, my father surprised me with a brand new child-sized ATV. It wasn't one of the electric ones that you're probably picturing either. It was a damn fast, gas-powered quad four-wheeler. Now, at this point, a good amount of you are probably questioning why someone would give a gas-powered ATV to a 7-year-old child. But, like I said, my parents were a bit reckless and my dad really, just wanted me to have some fun. Pretty much right after I got the thing, I learned how to ride it by myself, and started going farther into and past the property than I ever had before. I now had a free ride to basically as far as my young self would let me go, before turning back. I started riding through the orchards behind my house almost every day, and I loved it more than I had loved anything before. I would leave my house and be gone for hours. After a while, I gradually started roaming farther and farther away from my house as I became more brazen and a little older. I would ride down this dirt path that led past what I assumed was our neighbour's land, and to a ditch that held water. At the time, I just liked looking at the water as it flowed, and I felt like I was a little bit of an explorer. I honestly never even contemplated that what I was doing could be the least bit dangerous, and I really don't think my parents knew how far I was riding. When I think back on it now, just the idea of riding a pretty dangerous piece of equipment far away from my house, without my parents knowing where I was, and before cell phones even existed, it's pretty scary in itself, as I could have crashed or hit my head, and no one would have been able to find me. However, luckily, this never happened, and is not what this story is about. So, one day, like every other day, I was riding far away from my home, and I passed a man wearing a dirty white shirt, denim jeans, and a farmer's hat. I remember it vividly, as it was the first person that I had seen in all that time that I had been out there. I remember the surprised look in his eyes as he stared at me while I rode past him. I had no reason to stop, and my parents had always taught me about stranger danger, so I just kept going and forgot about it. On the way back home, a couple of hours later, I was coming up to the same spot, and it dawned on me that this is where I had seen that man. I looked ahead, not expecting him to actually be there. As I said, it had been hours. Yet, as the trees parted, there he was. I really didn't think it was too weird, because I figured that he was either a farmer or a homebody, so I just kept driving, coming closer to where he was. He seemed friendly, to be honest. He had a big smile on his face, like he was happy to see me, and to my 10-year-old self, I just thought that he was a friendly guy. So I waved at him as I passed by, and he waved back. I continued on my way and drove home, not thinking much about it. I don't really remember how much time had passed between then and the next time that I went riding, but it couldn't have been more than a couple of days. And like usual, I took the same dirt road, past the same few orchards to the same ditch full of water. I didn't think much about the previous encounter, so I hadn't been thinking about the stranger with the big smile. I was sitting on the edge of the ditch when I heard footsteps in the dirt coming up from behind me. Again, I remember this vividly because it was not a common occurrence to see anyone on this trail. I remember being more curious than scared, and turned around to see the same stranger with the smile. But this time, his smile seemed to be a bit more of a toothy grin. He called out to me as he walked up, asking what my name was in a heavy southern drawl. I told him with confidence that I wasn't really allowed to talk to strangers, to which he said, "That's a good idea. Although, you really shouldn't be out here all by yourself. It could be dangerous for a kid your age, you know." I remember this striking me in the gut with a little bit of a butterfly feeling. I wasn't afraid, but I did feel uneasy. This piqued my curiosity, though, as I wondered what he meant, so I asked him. He continued to walk closer to me slowly and answered, "Well, I heard they found a little boy out here, just around your age in fact. I think it was that ditch right there where he drowned." I would like to point out here that although my parents were reckless, they were not stupid. If there had been a drowning near a house that was reported, or there had been a story in the paper, they definitely wouldn't have let me out anymore. Anyways, he continued. Hey, why don't you come with me and I'll take you back to your parents? It's not safe out here for a kid your age. It's okay. I have my quad right here. I'll just ride back. I pointed over to the side of him where my quad was, but he didn't look. His eyes remained fixed on me. They were deep brown, almost black in fact, and they were piercing into me. At this point, I was scared and knew that this could be a bad situation. I was hoping that he was just a concerned old man, but there was no way that I was going with him anywhere. I got to my feet and started walking to my quad, to which the man said, "Should a kid your age be riding something that dangerous? Let's just put it in my truck and I'll give you a ride back." I don't see your truck," I said, looking around, hoping to talk my way out of this situation. Oh, yeah, it's right over there on my property. You actually can't see it from here," he said, his smile widening. It's really okay. I'll just go now," I said, starting again to walk to my quad. But as I passed him, he reached and grabbed my arm. "You really shouldn't be out here," he said, staring me deep in the eyes. "It's not safe for little kids." "Let me go, you're hurting me," I shouted, starting to panic. But this only made him grip tighter. "Maybe you don't deserve to go back home. What kind of parents would let their kids out here all alone anyway? Maybe you should come home with me and I'll take care of you." At this point, I was about to pee my pants. I was freaking out and I just started to scream. I don't know if I was saying anything. I just know that I was screaming as loud as I ever had before. This only seemed to anger him though, as his once toothy grin turned to a face of anger. He put his hand over my face and I took this opportunity to bite at his finger as hard as I could. I still remember the taste of blood, so I know I hurt him pretty bad. Thankfully, this caught him off guard as he finally let me go. I knew this was my one chance to get away from this weirdo, so I booked it to my quad as he winced in pain. You little shit! Get the fuck over here!" he cried in anger. I knew that I didn't have much time, so I jumped on my quad and turned the key as fast as I could. It started up, and just as I pulled the gas handle, I felt a hand start to grab my neck. Luckily, he didn't have a grip yet, as I was already starting to drive away. I punched it and noped the hell out of there. At this point, all I could hear was the sound of my quad, so I wasn't sure if he was running after me. But I wasn't going to look, as I could possibly crash and be SOL. I drove down that dirt path as fast as the quad would go, probably the fastest that I had ever driven it. When I got home, I peeled out into the dirt and ran into the house, hoping to God that my mum was home. I burst into her room, bawling, and there she was. She asked me what was wrong, but I couldn't talk yet. I was just so afraid. I just kept bawling, and I think that I cried for a good 30 minutes before I could summon up the strength to stop and tell her what had happened. I remember the fear in her eyes as I described what happened. She just pulled me close to her and hugged me as hard as she ever had. The next day, I talked to a police officer and recounted the story of what transpired. I honestly don't remember much after this, as I think that I just started to block it out. It's not really something a 10-year-old wants to think about, right? Needless to say, they never let me off the property again. My dad started drinking too, and we actually lost the house soon after this anyways, so I didn't have to live there much longer. Recently though, I was thinking about that day, after I started trying to remember various parts of my childhood. My parents had never told me what happened after the cops were called, and I had never really asked because I tried not to think about it. So yesterday, I went to her house and asked her if they ever found the guy, considering that he had to live pretty close to our property. She was kind of startled by the question because we hadn't talked about this in 15 years. She paused for a minute, as if pondering whether to tell me, and said, We didn't actually have any neighbors out that way. It was all corporate-owned land, and the description you gave didn't match any of the neighbors in the other direction. We called the cops, and they went to search where you told us that you were, but the guy was long gone by the time that they got there. They looked around the property, though, and found an abandoned house that hadn't been used in years since the land was purchased. And when they looked inside, they could tell that there had been someone staying there. Apparently, he left his stuff behind. We never told you because, well, you were just way too young. But one of the things that they found was a black grocery bag, and it had a roll of duct tape and a hunting knife inside of it.